everybody's favorite topic, slavery. Now today, you're not going to learn about anything fun like, I don't know, Nebraska. But we will be discussing the misfortune that we all know as slavery in the early United States.
Mr. Green, did you know that by 1840 the U.S. provided half of the world's cotton supply?
I did. I'm John Green. Who do you think I am? A junior in high school sitting in APUSH?
In fact, cotton was so profitable that farmers were drawn from all over the country to the Gulf states to farm it. The only thing that farmers had to be careful of is that they didn't make the same mistake the stupid colonists did and let their soil run out of nutrients. So while the farmers were focused on getting cotton, they got caught up in an economic spiral, and they were like, hey guys, let's buy as much land and as many slaves as we can afford. Now, nobody was really upset about the cotton trade since the northern shippers profited from it also. Shippers had to travel from the southern ports to Europe where they sold it for silver, which is of course more valuable than the paper money that was being used in the States. From there, the money was used back in the U.S. to buy goods needed to continue the cycle and force slaves into harsh labor for the owner's profit. Fun!
So basically, everybody depended on slaves, and countries from all over the world depended on the U.S. to give them cotton. So everybody needed America, and America needed their slaves. Britain especially needed America for their cotton, since at the time they were the industrial power of the world.
In the 1850s, Britain was all about cotton clothing, so much so that a fifth of their population lived off the textiles production, 75% of which came from the U.S. Now you may be thinking, didn't this make the British dependent on America? Well, yes, you're completely right, and Southern leaders knew this and used it to their advantage. As they say, cotton was king, the gin was his crown, and the slaves were his henchmen. If war were to break out, the North's best bet would be to cut off the cotton trade from the South. This, however, would be suicidal because British factories would have to close, leading to strikes by its workers, and the British government forcing the cotton trade back open, winning the war for the South.
Before the war, the South was more of an oligarchy than a democracy. The tiny percentage of Southerners that owned slaves influenced the government more than the majority of the population that didn't. This uneven spread of government influence was cause for the creation of the term cottonocracy. Rich families who were part of this cottonocracy, like John C. Calhoun and Jefferson Davis, for example, obviously gave their children the finest education and opportunities since they cared more about their own children than anyone else's.
So with all of the rich kids at private schools, there was no funding or backbone to public education. And since we haven't had enough weirdness in this video yet, let's talk about jousting. Oddly enough, Southern states wanted to build a sense of medievalism. So if you don't already think that the Southerners were terrible people because of their position on slavery, maybe you can find your inner hostility when you hear about what they did for the sake of building culture.
They were total freaks and apparently staged jousting tournaments for their slaves to compete in. This odd spectacle would be one of the reasons Southern states produced a higher number of front-ranking men than the dollar-grubbing North. You know what they say, the best military men once competed in staged medieval jousting competitions. Anyways, the economic structure really sucked because when the land ran out, smaller farms were forced to sell their land to the larger plantations. Because they were stupid and hadn't taken Dave Ramsey's financial class, a bunch of planters bought too much land, too many slaves, and went into terrible debt.
So since we're already talking about financial risk, slaves were also terribly risky because you never knew if they would run away, die by disease, or commit suicide. Often, slaves devised ways to make trouble without getting caught or be majorly punished. Slaves would work as slow as they could without getting whipped, stole food, sabotaged expensive equipment, and even poisoned their master's food on occasion.
And now time for the mystery box. What do you have for us today, Paige? Wow, oh, look at this. Oh, look what we got here, Nebraska! What is this?
Alright, let's just put that back down there. Alright, here, take it. No, get your hand off there, slave! Okay, that's enough. Let's get back to the video.
Because some people had a brain, slave importation was banned in 1808. However, they continued to be smuggled into the United States because of their high demand. Despite this huge step towards protecting slaves, it was still difficult to enforce abolitionist laws. Although the smuggling continued on, the growing slave population was mostly due to their natural reproduction. Breeding slaves was not encouraged, but women who gave birth to many children were prized and sometimes were promised freedom after having 10 children. Since buying new slaves was such a huge investment and risk now, they were sometimes treated kindly and spared the most dangerous jobs to prevent injury or death. However, slave life still meant hard work, no rights, whipping if orders weren't followed. Also, lash beatings were becoming less common since it could lower the value of a slave if they were beaten too much. Slave auctions were very brutal, with slaves being inspected like animals and families often being separated. As Harriet Tubman said, "Every great dream begins with a dreamer."
The almighty King Cotton led to a one-crop economy whose price was determined from conditions all around the world. Jealous Southerners hated the people from the North that got rich off of the slaves in the South. So while Northerners were living a lavish lifestyle, the South depended on them for clothing, food, and goods. Like some people in America today, the South was terrified of letting European immigrants in. Donald Trump. Oh wait, that's not Donald Trump.
He wouldn't want, quote, such a hothead with his finger on the nuclear codes. You as well have raised...
Oh, that's much better. There he is.
Contrary to belief, wealthy slave owners made up the least of the population in the South. The less wealthy slave owners, who owned less slaves, made up the majority of the population. 3/4 of the Southern population consisted of non-slave owning whites, and the only reason why these people supported slavery was because they hoped to become slave owners and continue the American dream to move up in society. Less prosperous non-slave holding whites were known as poor white trash and hillbillies. This is because civilization had not reached the Appalachian Mountains and its valley. The people in the mountains actually supported Abraham Lincoln and his party. Slaves that were fortunate enough to become free settled in New Orleans. Southerners were upset with the freed blacks and basically told them, "You can't have good jobs or testify in court, so just get out of here."
Discriminated in both the North and the South, they were known as the third race. Southerners liked individual blacks but hated them as a race. The Northerners were the complete opposite, so they liked the race but not the individuals. By 1860, there were about 250,000 freed blacks in the South. So freed blacks in the Upper South descended from the slaves that were freed from the Civil War and the idea that all men were created equal. In the Deep South, they were usually mulattoes, which meant that they had a black mother and their father was the master. So when they were freed, it was because their father or master had died. Ironically, and I mean with the most irony that could possibly exist, many freed blacks had their own slaves themselves. The free blacks in the North were denied entrance in some states and were denied the right to vote and banned from public schools. The blacks' biggest competition were the Irish, who they competed with for jobs. So slaves virtually had no dignity and were illiterate.
Slaves were able to mix the Christian religion with their own native religion and make their own music about freedom, such as "Let My People Go." In conclusion, slavery was a terrible misfortune, and blacks were terribly persecuted and had no chance at the American dream.
That's all. This has been AP US History with John Green. See you next time.
That's a cut, people.